The morning sky above Providence was gray, heavy with the promise of snow. Wind carried the chill of November down the quiet streets, slipping through alleyways and corners where the forgotten hid from the world. On one such corner, near a small grocery store, sat a girl with tangled brown hair and eyes that looked older than her years. Her name was Sophie Miller, and she was 14. Sophie had spent the last 2 nights beneath a bridge with her younger brother, Liam, trying to keep him warm with a tattered blanket. Their mother had died of an illness months earlier, and their father had vanished before that, swallowed by his own darkness. Hunger had become a constant ache, a quiet companion they could neither ignore nor fight. That morning, Sophie made a decision she never thought she would. She slipped into the grocery store, trembling from cold and fear. She filled her small hands with what she could carry, a loaf of bread, 2 apples, and a can of soup. As she turned toward the exit, a voice shouted behind her. A man's hand clamped down on her shoulder. Within minutes, she was surrounded by police lights, her little brother watching from the corner with terrified eyes. The next morning, Sophie stood in the Providence Municipal Court. Her face was pale, her hands clutched the sleeves of an oversized sweater. Around her, adults shuffled papers and whispered about fines and sentences. But when the door opened and Judge Frank Caprio walked in, the room changed. His presence was calm, almost fatherly, and his eyes held something that courts rarely saw: kindness. He took his seat, placed his glasses on, and began his morning session. Case after case passed quickly until he reached Sophie's file. He paused for a moment, frowning slightly as he read the charges. "State of Rhode Island versus Sophie Miller," he said softly. "Petty theft, food items from a grocery store." He looked up, and their eyes met, his steady and gentle, hers frightened and uncertain. "What happened, young lady?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. Sophie hesitated. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The room waited. Finally, she whispered, "I was hungry, sir." He leaned forward slightly. "Just you?" She shook her head. "My brother, too. He's 6. We sleep under the bridge on Broad Street." A murmur went through the courtroom. The sound of papers stopped. Even the police officer who had brought her in lowered his gaze. Judge Caprio said nothing for a long moment. He simply watched her, the way her small hands trembled, the way she kept her chin down, too ashamed to meet his eyes. "Do you have any family?" he asked finally. "My mom's gone," she whispered. "Dad left before she died. It's just me and Liam." He nodded slowly, then closed the file in front of him. "And the food you took, that was for both of you." She nodded. "He was hungry. I didn't know what else to do." Something in the judge's expression softened further. He tapped his fingers on the desk for a moment, as if weighing the invisible scale between law and humanity. "The law says you committed a crime," he said. "But laws were written by people. And people are not perfect. They forget that sometimes mercy is stronger than judgment." He leaned toward his bailiff. "Is there an officer outside?" "Yes, Your Honor," the bailiff replied. "Please bring in the boy waiting out there," said Caprio. "And get him something warm to eat." Minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. A small boy with bright blue eyes peeked inside, wrapped in a borrowed blanket and holding a half-eaten sandwich. When he saw Sophie, he ran straight to her, and she dropped to her knees to hug him. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Caprio watched the scene quietly, his heart heavy. "What's your name, young man?" he asked. "Liam," the boy said shyly. "Well, Liam," said the judge, smiling gently, "you're very lucky to have a sister who loves you so much." Sophie clutched her brother tightly, afraid that any moment someone would pull him away. But instead, Judge Caprio's voice softened further. "Sophie," he said, "the law gives me a choice. And I choose compassion." He lifted his gavel and spoke clearly. "The charges are dismissed." A collective breath filled the room. Sophie blinked, unable to understand. "Dismissed?" she whispered. "But I don't have money to pay." "You don't need to," he interrupted gently. You've already paid with more pain than anyone your age should carry. Tears filled her eyes. Why are you helping us? The judge's smile grew faint but warm. Because someone once helped me when I had nothing, he said. And I promised I'd never forget. He nodded to the bailiff. Officer Daniels will take you both to the shelter on Elm Street. They'll give you food, clothes, and a warm bed. I'll make sure you're looked after. Sophie's tears fell freely now. She clung to her brother and whispered, Thank you? Judge Caprio only said, Make me one promise, that you'll never stop believing you deserve a better life. I promise, she said through her tears. The days that followed were different for Sophie and Liam. They were no longer sleeping under the bridge. The shelter became their temporary home, warm meals, clean clothes, people who smiled when they spoke. Sophie began to attend school again through a local charity program. At first, she struggled. The noise of classrooms, the laughter of other kids, it all felt strange after the silence of the streets. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the judge's eyes. The way he looked at her not as a criminal, but as someone worth saving. He had given her something no one else had, faith. Months passed. Sophie began to read voraciously, finishing every book the shelter's small library had. She especially loved stories about justice, about people who stood up for others. She began to dream of becoming one of them someday. Liam thrived too. He laughed again, made friends, and called every policeman he saw the good guys. Sometimes, on quiet weekends, Judge Caprio would stop by the shelter to check on them. He never came with cameras or reporters, only with a smile and sometimes a box of pastries. How are you doing, Sophie? He'd ask. She'd smile shyly and say, Studying hard, sir. He'd nod proudly. Good. Keep at it. The world needs more people like you. Years slipped by. The snow kept falling and melting over Providence, but Sophie never forgot the day her life changed in that courtroom. When she turned 18, she aged out of the shelter program, but by then she had scholarships and recommendations from teachers who believed in her. She worked part-time, studied relentlessly, and slowly built her future brick by brick. There were nights when she wanted to quit, when loneliness and exhaustion felt heavier than any hunger she'd known. But every time she thought of stopping, she heard that voice again. Promise me you'll never stop believing you deserve a better life. And she kept going. 7 years later, the courtroom looked almost the same. The same walls, the same wooden benches, the same quiet hum before the judge entered. But this time, the young woman sitting near the front row was not trembling or afraid. She wore a neat suit, her hair tied back, and her hands rested calmly on a stack of files. When Judge Caprio entered, she stood respectfully. All rise, called the bailiff. Good morning, said Caprio, adjusting his glasses. He opened the next case file and began reading. State of Rhode Island vs. Jordan Keller, juvenile charge. The defendant was a nervous boy, no older than 16, accused of vandalizing a car. As the hearing began, a new voice spoke beside him, calm, firm, and compassionate. Your Honor, the young woman said, I'm representing the defendant as part of the youth advocacy program. Caprio looked up. The voice sounded familiar. He peered at her closely, the steady brown eyes, the soft but confident tone, and his expression changed. Sophie? He said quietly. She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. Yes, Your Honor. Sophie Miller. But you can call me Attorney Miller now. For a long moment, the courtroom was silent. Even the bailiff smiled faintly. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, astonished. Well, he said finally, his voice warm with emotion. I once met a little girl who stood in this courtroom trembling. She had stolen a loaf of bread to feed her brother. I never thought I'd see her again, certainly not like this. Sophie laughed softly, brushing away a tear. You told me never to stop believing I deserved a better life. I took that promise seriously. Caprio smiled. You kept your word. And now you're standing up for others. I can't think of anything more beautiful. Sophie nodded. Because of you, Judge. You didn't just give me freedom that day. You gave me a future. The judge's voice grew soft. No, Sophie. You built that future yourself. I just opened the door. He looked down at the young boy sitting beside her, scared, lost, and silent. Do you know something, Jordan? He said kindly. The woman standing next to you once sat where you are. She turned her life around. You can too. Sophie turned to the boy and smiled. He's right. You're not your mistakes. The boy looked at her, his eyes full of tears. For the first time, he believed her. After the session ended, Sophie waited outside the courthouse steps. Snow began to fall again, soft, white, and silent. Judge Caprio walked out moments later, wrapping his coat tighter. You never stopped coming back to this place, did you? He asked with a smile. Sophie shook her head. No, sir. This is where my life began. He chuckled. That's a poetic way to describe a courtroom. She looked at him, eyes full of gratitude. For most people, this is a place of judgment. But for me, it was where I met my angel. He looked slightly surprised. Your angel? Yes, she said. The one who showed me that mercy can heal more than punishment ever could. For a moment, the old judge was silent, his heart swelling with pride and humility. Then he said, You know, Sophie, angels come in many forms. Some wear robes, and some grow up to wear suits. Sophie laughed softly, and together they stood in the falling snow, the judge who believed in mercy and the girl who became living proof that compassion can rewrite destiny. And so, in a small courtroom in Providence, a story came full circle. One act of kindness created a ripple that traveled through years, touching lives unseen. Because justice without compassion is law. But justice with love, that's humanity. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to see the angel hidden inside the broken.